Let's talk about one of Toronto's cases while I'm driving to work, since I never really have time to sit down and recording, all the aesthetics and whatever. So this case has actually been solved, and it happened back in 2011. But let's go into the backstory a little bit. So 21-year-old Shaher Bano Shahdady was found strangled in her bed on the in her sixth floor apartment on July 22nd, 2011. Her son, who was almost 2 at the time, was left in the apartment with his mother's body for about 12 to 15 hours before she was found. And her Unalive was found almost immediately because it was someone known to her. It was actually the father of her son and her husband at the time. They were going through a separation. She had asked for a divorce, and that's what angered him. So Shaher was born in Pakistan, but she moved to Canada when she was about 1 year old, and she lived here until she was about 12 or 13, and then she was sent back to Pakistan. And she eventually met her husband Abdul, and I'm not sure, I think the families were known to each other because this was an arranged marriage. They got married. She became pregnant immediately after. Throughout the pregnancy, the scans and the checkups or whatever, they determined that their baby, their son, was going to have some sort of medical complication. So her family advised her to come back to Canada to give birth to the baby, which she did. She returned to Canada and she gave birth to her son in late August of 2009. But because her husband, Abdul, he didn't have Canadian status, so he stayed back in Pakistan. When their son was born, he had heart issues. So she ended up staying in Canada. So they were separated for almost 2 years. He didn't join them in Canada until March of 2011. He moved into the basement of Shaher's family home. And almost immediately he was asked to leave because he was very controlling. He didn't like the fact that she had a cell phone and she was on social media. So he was asked to leave. But her dad was in Pakistan at the time when all of this was going on. So when he came back to Canada, he asked Abdul to move back into the family home. So, he can reunite with his wife and try to work things out. This was in May of 2011. And by July of 2011, Shaher, she was at her wit's end. She's like, this relationship is not working out. I'm not giving up my cell phone. They were having the same arguments as they were, previously. So she applied for social assistance, got a place of her own, and moved out in July of 2011. She moved to an apartment at 3131 Eglinton Ave E. And on July 22nd at around 1 a.m., her husband Abdul entered the building. He was wearing a burqa, which is, women's, the Muslim garb that they wear. He was wearing women's shoes because he knew the building had surveillance cameras. So he dressed up in the burqa, women's wedges, entered the building, went up to the apartment, and he even manipulated a camera that was placed outside of her. I'm not sure if it was directly outside her door, but at least in the hallway so they can see when someone enters the unit. He manipulated that. He gained access to the apartment. This was at 1 in the morning, so I'm thinking maybe he not pretended that he was a woman in help or something of the sort. Regardless, he got into the apartment and almost immediately he attacked her. Shaher fought for her life because there were scratches all over Abdul's face and neck. So she fought for her life. And neighbors actually heard their son crying for about 15 minutes at around 1 a.m. That's why we got the time. But it was one woman that noticed it. She was 91 years old. She said she came to the door and looked out. She didn't see anyone, and she didn't even realize that someone had moved into that particular apartment. So she just went back in her house. After the unaliving, the murder, Shaher actually went back. Abdul actually went back to Shaher's parents' home and accompanied his father-in-law to mosque for prayers at 4:30 a.m. Something I forgot to mention, he was still living in the basement at Shaher's family home. Later that day, he confessed to his brother that he had finished her by the throat. And the brother alerted Shaher's family to go to her home. When they arrived and they were knocking, Abdul actually showed up and opened the door, which means he took her keys after the murder. He unalived his wife, left his son in the apartment, a son that he knows had heart issues. He was born with heart issues. And he left him there with his mother's dead body. So as I said, when the family was at the house knocking, he came, entered, and when he saw the body now, he ran out, faking he was hurt, he was crying and whatever. He was trying to, fool people into thinking. But then he actually confessed. He confessed that he did it, but he had his reasons. So he was charged with first-degree murder, but he eventually pled guilty in 2014 to second-degree murder, and he was given life in jail with the possibility of parole after 17 years. And I know I always say this, there's no such thing as life in Canada, but there are some, but we'll talk about that another time. And hopefully he will be deported when he's released on parole. Hopefully he is deported, because he's a landed immigrant. He wasn't a citizen, and usually if you're a landed immigrant and you commit a serious crime like what he did, once you serve your time, you're usually deported back to your native country. So hopefully he's deported back to Pakistan. Yeah, so have you guys ever heard about this story? It's crazy what the lengths that people will go to get to someone once they, whatever they want to unalive them or get back at them or whatever. This man dressed up in woman's clothing to go into his wife's apartment. She was clearly trying to separate from him. She was trying to separate. She didn't want anything to do with him, and he couldn't let that go. He dressed up as a woman and unalived his wife, leaving his son, who is now being raised by Shaher's parents, as an orphan, basically. But yeah, have you guys ever heard about this story? There are so many articles out there covering this case, and I'll be posting the links in the description box below. So if anyone is interested, you can go on over and read upon it. But I found this so sad. Um, the victim's family, Shaher's family, did not even go to court to testify on her behalf or even submit a victim impact statement. Instead, they pled for mercy for their daughter's killer. So this alone shows you she had no support. She was out here in this world. She was 21 years old. She was young, a young mother. And her son actually had to have a heart transplant. When she came back and she gave birth to him, like I said, he had heart issues, and they actually had to do a heart transplant. That's why she stayed in the country for so long and away from Abdul, which is where she started to gain some independence. She wanted to go to school. She wanted better for herself and her son. And she obviously didn't have her family support. And this case is actually considered an honor killing. The courts don't classify it as that, but a lot of people in the Muslim community consider it like that. But I'll be posting the links below. Let me know your comments. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please do so. And I'll see you guys in another one. Bye.